After defeating the competing forces in the Civil War, Emperor Augustus entered a period of consolidating power and rebuilding the Roman Empire. One of his greatest ambitions was to push the northern border of the empire beyond the Rhine, deep into the wild land called Germania. A vast, dangerous area full of peaceful, sharing, and fiercely warring barbarian tribes. Augustus's plan was not only military but also a strategy of colonization. New provinces were established, tax systems were established, and a series of Germanic chieftains were Romanized through ennoblement, marriage, or sending their daughters to Rome for training. In the thinking of the Augustan court, the Germans could be civilized, transformed into citizens subject to Roman law and order, as had been the case in Gaul. And the facts were in their favor. From 4 to 6 AD, the Roman army, under Tiberius, won a series of victories and forced many tribes to submit. Germania Magna seemed to be in Rome's hands. To administer the new territory, Augustus appointed Publius Quinctilius Verus, a nobleman with a lot of political experience but lacking in military experience, as governor. He was tasked with applying the Roman legal system, stabilizing the administration, and maintaining the natural order, confident that the Germanic leaders had submitted and pledged their allegiance. Among the closest Germanic allies at that time was Arminius, a young leader of the Cherusci tribe, regarded by Rome as a model of a successfully civilized man. Having served in the army as a Roman citizen, trained in tactics, and knowing how to take advantage of Roman responsibilities. However, it was this blind faith in the external stability of breadth and surface assimilation that laid the foundation for one of the greatest military blunders in Roman history. In 9 AD, the seemingly invincible Roman Empire struck a fateful blow called the Teutoburg. In the dense rainforest of the wild Germania, the three elite Roman legions, 17, 18, 19, were led into the rugged terrain and fell into a fierce battle that even Roman historians had to sadly call the greatest disaster ever seen. Along with them, the entire entourage, from the fake food wagons, the engineer team, the slaves, the fortune tellers, to the people who made games along the way, were all soothed by the jungle and native education. The perpetrator of the massacre was none other than a Germanic field commander, Arminius, who, just a few years ago, had been a cavalry officer in the Roman army, spoke Latin like a native, and had been trained by the empire itself. But instead of being loyal to the Golden Eagle, he chose to turn around and stick the spear of betrayal into the heart of the empire that had nurtured him. And the throw shook Rome. The Teutoburg fall was not only a military disaster, but also the worst psychological shock of the Augustan Empire. No library could satisfy. Not a single credible survivor returned. The names of the three defeated legions were erased from the Roman army forever, as a bitter ritual of revenge. But while the senators in Rome debated whether to send more troops across the Rhine or erect more statues to appease the souls of the dead, Arminius wasted no time. In his victory, he skillfully consolidated a loose alliance of Germanic tribes, from the Cherusci, the Marsi, to the Bructeri, names that at first sounded like myths, but which were living political entities, ready to kill or turn against each other at any moment. Arminius did not possess a state in the Roman style, no written laws, no senate, and no central command. But he did possess something that made every great Roman general wary: a deep-seated hatred of hatred, an ability to blend into the jungle as if it were his armor, and above all, the cruelest weapon, the Roman military knowledge he had absorbed, now turned on the very empire that had trained him. After the Teutoburg disaster, the Roman Empire became extremely cautious and focused on strengthening its border defenses. Augustus, although haunted by the serious defeat, ordered the withdrawal of his troops from the deep areas beyond the Rhine, and directed the construction and reinforcement of a strong defense system along the river, including the establishment of additional forts and ramparts to prevent incursions by Germanic tribes. These strong forts not only served as defenses, but also served as centers for landings, supplies, and reconnaissance operations to gather information, allowing the Roman army to maintain a stable presence in a hostile land. Thanks to this defense system, Rome could organize reconnaissance campaigns that were warning and deterrent, instead of large-scale invasions as before. At the same time, the Roman government also actively strengthened alliances with pro-Roman Germanic tribes in order to create a buffer zone against opposing forces. Meanwhile, Arminius continued to consolidate and expand the alliance of German tribes against Roman domination. The wheel of history continued to turn. In 14 AD, Augustus died. His successor, Tiberius, although not known for his adventurous spirit, understood one thing: to let the disgrace of Teutoburg rot in memory would be to let Arminius erect a victory monument in the middle of the forum. So he entrusted his nephew and adopted son, Germanicus Julius Caesar, with the entire campaign across the Rhine, with a clear mission: to avenge, restore honor, and, if possible, bring Arminius's head back to Rome. Germanicus quickly set to work. With the support of seasoned generals such as Aulus Caecina Severus, he launched a series of major and minor campaigns from 14 to 16 AD Germania, which had thought that Rome had retreated, now heard once more the sound of hobnails, the sound of horns, and the smell of campfire smoke from returning legions. But this time, Arminius was no longer a lone ambusher. He had become a symbol, a haunting, and most importantly, a teacher of asymmetric resistance in the swamps and forests. It is in this context that many modern archaeological clues begin to shed new light on the events that followed Teutoburg. Excavations at Calcres, previously associated with the Varus ambush, and now considered by some scholars to be the remains of a counteroffensive by Germanicus, show that Arminius continued to score notable successes in ambush battles in 15 AD. The discovery of an ancient wooden road at nearby Bramsche, dating to AD 15, further highlights the ferocity of the post-Teutoburg fighting and shows that Germanicus' campaign was not an easy one, even under the name of revenge. After the crushing blow at Teutoburg, the Roman Empire did not embark on a blind revenge, but instead embarked on a series of carefully calculated campaigns, both military and psychological. Among the generals under Germanicus, Aulus Caecina Severus was a particularly notable figure. A former heavy-duty governor of Germania Inferior, he was experienced, well-versed in the harsh terrain and the Germanic warrior mentality, both wild and uncertain. The Roman strategy was no longer one of permanent conquest, which had been the dream under Augustus, but of re-establishing influence and weakening the ability of the native tribes to form alliances. With three main armies, Germanicus organized his campaign in 15 AD in a soft pincer style, attacking simultaneously from multiple directions, aiming to divide and disrupt the coordination between the Germanic tribes led by Arminius. Caecina commanded one of the most important wings of the army, some 40,000 men, including several veteran legions, including Legio Vepurin Rapax, auxiliary cavalry, and a large corps of technicians, who were vital in campaigns over difficult terrain. His objective was to penetrate deep into the lands of the Marsi and Bructeri tribes, to conduct a flexible offensive and defensive campaign, and to reopen the ancient wooden trails known as the Pontes Longi, long bridges spanning the treacherous marshes between the Ems River and the Teutoburg forest. Caecina was no amateur. He had fought in Illyricum, understood how to march in difficult terrain, and more importantly, had a practical mind for a campaign where the armies had to coordinate without losing their rhythm. Caecina's goal was to march deep into Marsi territory, pillaging, intimidating, and creating a pincer movement from the south, while Germanicus pressed from the north. Caecina's flank was a key part of Germanicus's strategic encirclement plan. If it went well, it would close in on the alliance center commanded by Arminius from the south, forcing the enemy to disperse their forces or risk a confrontation in unfavorable terrain. But in reality, it was the terrain that began to work first, not the tactics. However, Arminius did not sit idly by and wait to be crushed. After the Battle of Teutoburg, he did not rest on his laurels, but actively expanded the alliance, reinforced his axis of movement, and most importantly, learned how to fight the Romans in their own way. Under the mist and among the giant oaks, he quickly realized that Caecina's column of baggage, wagons, slaves, craftsmen, and gunners was a tasty morsel. And unlike at Teutoburg, he did not have to wait for the Romans to stray, for they were walking into a trap themselves. He had men tracking his every move, observing the dependence on logistics and roads, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Arminius understood. There was no need to engage in a full-scale battlefield battle. Just push a Roman army into a swampy, underfed, disoriented state, and the terrain itself would be his ally. And that opportunity came when Caecina began to withdraw. Having accomplished most of his objectives of pillaging and demonstrating his power, he chose the familiar route, the long bridges, to return to Roman control. But years of disuse had left the road rotten, slippery, and completely vulnerable. Caecina was now facing not only a flesh-and-blood enemy, but also the harsh challenges of nature. The land of northern Germania was not friendly. The swamps, the vast marshes that surrounded them, and the long, cold, damp autumn weather made everything doubly difficult. The rains fell incessantly, soaking the soldiers' armor and weapons, turning every inch of ground underfoot into a dangerous layer of slippery mud. Every road, instead of being a solid foothold for quick movement, now became a dangerous trap. The Romans could easily slip and fall, losing their advantage on the battlefield. But the danger was not only from nature. Ahead, Arminius, a former apprentice in the Roman army, and now the sharpest enemy, had prepared a deliberate trap more sophisticated than any typical Teutoburg ambush. Rather than pounce on his opponents in a quick and bloody battle, he chose to stall and prolong the battle, turning the road, a symbol of Roman strength and organization, into a tactical trap. Arminius knew every bog, every bend in broken timber, and chose it to erect a wall of death, what would later be known in history as the Long Bridges. He used the dense forest, marshes, and weather to force the Romans to fight not only against the enemy, but also against the natural hardships that were slowly sapping their strength, morale, and organization. Although the Battle of Long Bridges is mentioned in ancient sources, its exact location remains a matter of debate among scholars. Many scholars agree that excavations at Calcries today are actually linked to the Germanicus campaign, not the disastrous defeat of Varus in AD 9. Instead, Calcries, previously thought to be the site of the destruction of Varus's 3 legions, is now considered by some archaeologists and historians to have been the site of a battle during the Germanicus counteroffensive, possibly in AD 15, with evidence of a prolonged Roman presence, such as fragments of armor, caligae, Tiberian coins, and even the remains of temporary fortifications. This raises the possibility that a successful battle for Arminius took place here, where the Romans suffered such significant losses that they were forced to end the campaign early. Roman sources report only an ambiguous outcome, but according to Tacitus, the Romans returned without their cavalry, a sign that the legions had been split up immediately after the battle. Tacitus's ambiguous phrase, equites amici, is also taken by scholars as evidence that the Roman cavalry was either destroyed or abandoned in the woods in a fierce ambush, forcing Germanicus to retreat across the Ems. Near Calcries, an ancient wooden road was discovered near Bramsche, about 10 kilometers from Calcries, and is dated to 15 AD, consistent with reports of construction during the Roman retreat. The wooden road, which was over 1,000 meters long and about 3 meters wide, was built on a marshy ground using hundreds of oak planks and is a clear testament to the Roman army's ability to maneuver in harsh terrain, but also to their ability to fight and retreat in a hostile environment where each advance required reinforcement. Further discoveries of wooden swords and wooden clubs support the theory of a battle here. Some of the weapons and combat tools found bear scorch marks and are warped, suggesting a possible fire or fierce fighting in the wooded environment that was typical of the Calcries region at the time. In addition, the local spearheads and spear blades also show the coordination of the Germanic tribes that Arminius gathered, which often used light, mobile weapons, suitable for ambush warfare. However, it has been suggested that the location is too far from the Rhine to fit the Roman plank road description in the documents. It may simply have been a native German plank road, repurposed for the battle. Some schools of archaeology favor the hypothesis that the plank road at Bramsche may have been a prehistoric plank road repurposed for wartime use, rather than a new route constructed by the Romans. This raises questions about the extent of Roman control over the area east of the Rhine. Instead, the long bridges may have been located further southwest, between modern Münster and Coesfeld, near Roman legionary outposts such as Xanten and Haltern, making them more likely candidates. In particular, Haltern am See, an important logistical base for Germanicus, has left behind extensive archaeological evidence of large-scale military activity and may have served as a jumping-off point for campaigns across the Rhine into the interior. If true, the long bridges most likely refer to the vital timber routes built across the marshlands of the lower Lippe and Ems rivers, connecting Roman outposts with the contact zones. The Pontes Longi swamp road, which had been built during Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus's previous campaigns, had become the route for Caecina's retreat after completing his mission of sweeping the Marsi region. But contrary to expectations, the road was no longer intact. Heavy rains had continuously poured down, turning the low-lying ground around the swamp into a muddy mess, and sections of the rotten wooden bridge had collapsed in sections. The heavy Roman army, pulling wagons, field artillery, buffaloes, and even prisoners, had fallen into the natural maze they had created. The Romans could not deploy in standard battle formation, let alone line up in a line to defend. In such conditions, every step forward was a stumble. Every whistling wind in the bushes could signal the arrival of a spear or a dart from the deep forest. Not only that, the narrow, slippery, and shaky wooden road significantly slowed the march, causing serious congestion when vehicles and heavy equipment, such as mobile catapults and supplies, were moving. This situation created ideal conditions for the Germanic army to exploit the terrain advantage. Guerrilla warfare, harassing the rear, disrupting supplies, and most importantly, slowly eroding the morale of the Roman soldiers. And then Arminius took action, not repeating the all-out ambush model as at Teutoburg. This time Arminius divided his army into small groups, hiding in clusters in the dense woods, constantly firing arrows to harass and disrupt the marching formation. The first attacks were not intended to destroy, but to demoralize, to break the rhythm of the march. The Romans were forced to stop to repair the bridge, rebuild the collapsed sections, and at the same time deal with the Germanic cavalry that suddenly appeared on the right flank, then disappeared like ghosts into the jungle. Caecina responded with experience. He immediately set up a makeshift camp on the rare stretch of dry land, protecting the march with a temporary wooden fence while ordering the army's engineers to repair the road during the night. The Roman legions switched from marching to a defensive position, holding each section of the road, dividing their troops into battle groups interspersed with engineer troops. Throughout the night, the soldiers heard howls and Germanic calls to their comrades from the trees, where Arminius was playing mind games. Mind games here were more than just harassment. The echoes in the deep forest increased the sense of isolation and confusion, making the Roman soldiers, already exhausted from fighting, even more nervous, reducing their fighting effectiveness during the most crucial hours of the night. At dawn the next day, Arminius launched his main attack, a series of simultaneous attacks on both the camp and the road repair, targeting the supply wagons and the engineer area. The Germans charged in small but reckless groups, targeting the soft spots such as the rear and the supply area. The Romans counterattacked fiercely, but the terrain was narrow, making it impossible to deploy in the standard manipulus or cohorta formation. The hand-to-hand combat took place in the mud, where soldiers slipped, fell backwards, and were speared on the spot. In the chaos, Legio 21 Rapax, once one of the elite legions, suffered heavy casualties, especially in the rear where the supply wagons were protected. However, Caecina kept his cool. He withdrew some of his troops from the central axis, pulling them out to the sides to form an inverted trapezoid formation, both to repel Arminius's scattered attacks and to organize his defenses in the style of pikemen and shields. Building into a wall, Arminius's attack seemed designed to be prolonged, not decisive. Each attack was aimed at attrition, then retreated quickly. Not that he was indecisive, but that he wanted to turn the Roman retreat into a desperate retreat, where every advance would cost blood and spirit. In the afternoon, when the Romans began to open a path out of the marshes, a major battle broke out again before nightfall. Arminius sent a new force, attacking the weak right wing. The defense line was almost broken, if not for the Galician and Batavian cavalry counterattacking strongly and retaking the center. That night, Caecina ordered the burning of heavy wagons, the release of prisoners, and the rapid movement of the rest of the army out of the marshes. By the next morning, after nearly 3 days of being trapped and fighting, the Romans emerged from the Pontes Longi, exhausted, with heavy casualties but still maintaining discipline. Despite the failure to maintain a safe retreat, Caecina's campaign was a testament to the Romans' perseverance and discipline in the face of extremely unfavorable terrain and tactical conditions. It also served as a valuable lesson for both sides in how to utilize terrain and tactics appropriately in jungle warfare. The clash at Pontes Longi, while not as spectacular as Teutoburg, was a stark warning to the Romans that Germania was not all woods and swamps. There was also a cunning Arminius who knew how to fight, how to retreat, and most importantly, how to destroy morale. Roman casualties are not accurately recorded, but they were so heavy, a large part of Legio 21 Rapax was wiped out. Many transport and engineer teams were destroyed in the repair of the road. The number of wounded was beyond the reach of the Medici, but the greater loss was morale. Caecina, a seasoned commander, nearly lost his life, and the entire legion returned to camp exhausted, demoralized, and cynical. According to ancient and modern sources, the loss of life may have been in the thousands, leaving the legion largely incapable of effective combat for a long time. In addition, the loss of many engineers and sappers severely delayed the ability to repair and build further routes, directly affecting the speed and safety of later Roman campaigns. In the eyes of many Roman historians, the Battle of Long Bridges was a tactical defeat, but a strategic victory in terms of resilience because they retreated with honor. As for Germanicus, the news from Pontes Longi gave him a headache. Arminius was no longer a small-time rebel, but had evolved into a regional commander who knew how to organize a war of attrition, knew the terrain better than a Roman map, and especially had a firm grasp of the local population's psychology. That forced Germanicus to reconsider his entire strategy, from the choice of marching routes, the way to protect the logistics, to the role of pro-Roman Germanic allies such as the Batavian and Chauci tribes. Germanicus had been expected to quickly end the uprisings by overwhelming the enemy forces. But after Pontes Longi, he was forced to realize that war in Germania was not simply a military clash. Instead, it required close coordination with local allies, increased intelligence, and improved operational capabilities, factors that the Romans had previously neglected. Moreover, the defeat at Pontes Longi forced the Roman court under Tiberius to reassess all its conquests east of the Rhine. This reticence gradually gave rise to a pragmatic defensive mindset that influenced Roman frontier strategy for decades to come, from strengthening the Lime system, shifting the focus to protecting Gallia and Raetia, to minimizing large-scale attacks across the Rhine. In the long run, the successive defeats in Germania, of which Pontes Longi was a key link, crushed the dream of Roman expansion northward and left a deep mark on Roman military thinking. The shadow of that defeat continued to cast over subsequent dynasties. Under Tiberius, Augustus's adoptive father and successor, he had little interest in continuing his campaigns in Germania. Instead, he chose to withdraw and maintain a defensive posture, a tacit admission that the limits of expansion had been drawn. Tacitus's writings suggest that Tiberius regarded moderation in war as a mark of imperial wisdom, a view that was rooted in the strategic shocks Germanicus had faced. The effects of the Battle of Pontes Longi continued to be felt under Emperor Domitian, reigned 81 to 96 AD, nearly 80 years after Varus's defeat in AD 9, and some 70 years after Germanicus's campaign in AD 14 to 16. During the wars against the Chatti, AD 83 to 85, Domitian began a series of punitive campaigns deep into Germania, but quickly withdrew after realizing the risks of advancing into the forests. He changed strategy by building a system of limes, fixed defensive lines, stretching from the Rhine to the Danube. This was a clear manifestation of a new military philosophy, which saw Germania not as a land to be conquered, but as a frontier to be blockaded. This continued the policy of retreat and defense since the time of Tiberius, reigned AD 14 to 37, showing that the ghost of Pontes Longi still lingered. Thank you for sticking with us until the end for this detailed analysis of the Battle of Long Bridges, where Roman tenacity and Arminius's cunning created an extremely thrilling confrontation between forests and marshes. If you find this video cool and engaging enough, don't hesitate to click like to let me know that you are catching these fascinating historical stories. Remember to subscribe to the channel to discover more classic battles, surprising historical stories, and unique analyses. Each like, each subscription, each share is fuel that helps our time vehicle continue to bring you in-depth, unique, and equally interesting analysis videos. See you in the next parts, where history is not just the past, but also an adventure.